This car, these cars, and their brakes never cease to amaze me. We've got a squeak on Lex's car from the front right hand side. Now it could just be wear, it could be something stuck. So before changing the pads or anything along those lines, sorry, I'm going to check that out. However, in the rear we also do have some drag. So rather the handbrake's catching or the caliper has some sort of possible issue that I'll have to diagnose. So let's get the car in the air. But first I've got to go grab some tools, so bear with me. Unfortunately this car, because it's off the road, also due to a brake issue on the front right hand side, I'll get there. We're using this as a bit of a work truck at the minute. So it's heavy as heck, but I gotta move it. As you would have seen in other videos, if you want to get to the rear, you jack it up from the main frame here. I'm having to use a low profile jack for this, just as I do in the other MR2. Now with the car jacked enough off the ground, time for our trusty tools. Now before taking any of the pads off, I'm first going to just do a visual inspection, checking how much depth I've got on the first pad, which is quite a hefty amount on this wheel. And at the back, I'm going to have to get a light in there to see. And then I'm just going to have a little check of all the components, but also check for any major pitting or scoring, anything I can feel under my nail. But then also when I relieve the handbrake in a moment, I'm going to see how stiff it is to turn. First I'll give it a quick clean. For this, just literally use any generic brake and clutch cleaner. I tend to buy in bulk. Oh, not shoot back at me. Now if you have a look, while I'm twisting this rotor, there's quite a bit of resistance. And this is a limited, or an open, sorry, differential car. That side moves so much easier. We tested this the other day with the wheel on the other side, so I'm just showing sort of how quickly that'll move. I know the wheel can make it move quicker. However, it really shouldn't struggle to move that much. So it might have an issue. So it's extremely hard for me to show, but from my visual inspection, the inside pad is a little thin, which would possibly be causing this drag issue. So let's get the caliper off. So to swing the top caliper away, we're using 11/16. Gonna get some WD-40 on it, and then just a regular ratchet, and hope I can get that bolt off. Now one tip to you, while using WD-40 near brake discs, brake pads, always have enough brake cleaner, because what you don't want is to put your foot on the brake and suddenly it's sliding because of the penetrant. So I'm just gonna get this socket on here and give it a little persuasion to get it off. So the top bolt was a little rusty and not coming off easy. So first I took off the bottom one, which is just access down the bottom here through a line-up hole. So now both the bolts are off, I was able to shimmy the caliper off without having to release anything. And that might be our culprit. If you can see, one of our brake pads is pretty okay, the other one not so much. So let's get that out and replace it with some new ones. So before continuing with any brake job, make sure that you line your pads up. There was a set of pads we had here, I don't know, they were just in the parts bin for the car, and as you can see, they don't match up by any degree or size. However, these do. So I always lay the parts on top of each other, confirm they're correct before they go back on the car. Now quickly I'm going to grab some grease to grease up certain parts that tend to seize on these, anything that touches metal on these sides that can wear. So I'll just grab that quick. Right, before aligning the brake pads back in, I'll show you in a moment, always have some sort of grease. I use copper grease or high temperature multi-purpose grease. However, this stuff gets everywhere, so again, keep your brake cleaner close, just in case you get any on the pads or discs in the process. One tip I also tend to use is making sure I line up in my head which way these are going to go in the car, so outside and inside, just to make sure I'm getting them in the correct places, because you don't want to be putting them on the wrong sides. However, just before that, this centerpiece that you can see that I'm trying to point out with my shadow there, that needs to be wound back. So I've got myself one of these little handy cubes. that fits on the end of a ratchet that should let us wind the caliper back nice and easy. Just universal, you can pick up at most parts stores. So I personally would not recommend one of these tools and to get a proper set. If you can see on the edges, from where I got this from, the edges are, let me see if I can get the side I used, all chipped, if you can see. It wasn't a very easy tool. As you can see, there's remnants inside there from the tool, but essentially I had to use a wrench, that tool, and then the old pad as leverage to then twist the caliper back in till it's pretty much all flat, and then at the same time just adding a little bit of grease and lube just to make sure our systems are all, well, working properly. Next, I'm going to do a dry without grease test of popping these pads in. So one in the back and then one in the front. The back one slides in nice and easy. I think I pushed it actually too far on that side, so I'll just get that locked into position in a moment. And then these little shims here, just crush like that in between, and then I'll show you when it's on. As you can see, I've made sure that the squeaker shim, that's this, that little thing there, is on the side of the outer disc, making sure everything's lining up. And then I'm just going to test fit it on the disc and make sure that I've wound back the caliper enough before we proceed to grease everything and put everything back together. So the caliper's just holding on lightly there, just to make sure everything goes in nicely. And I'm going to retake these bits out, and any piece that touches metal on these pads, they're going to get greased up. I'll show you in a second. So from putting the pads in, I'm always going to put a bit of grease on the back. I'm also just going to transfer this little shielding here. Just tend to do it as I go every single time I do these. But as you can see, there's markings on the back here and the sides of anywhere that would touch. As you can see, this is a witness mark here. Anything that would touch metal on the sides, the screw itself. So I'm going to make sure that gets greased up with a decent amount of copper grease or high temperature grease that you can use. So I've actually used a little too much, so I'm just going to take some of that off. However, as you can see, I've just done each side that's going to contact, just so that it's easy to get out in the future and we have no problems. And then I'm going to make sure to brake clean everything afterwards so that there's no grease left anywhere that's going to cause any issues. So while performing this process, I have got some grease on the pads, so I want to make sure to brake clean that now. Then we're just going to tighten these bolts up like I've just done, and we're back on. Most important thing, I've already gone over it a couple of times with this stuff, just to make sure there's no grease on there, and then we're all good. So the wheel now goes back on, and then we make sure it runs, and we do a test drive. And now you can see the wheel is running much smoother, but I've obviously got to do the handbrake, test the handbrake, and test the brakes themselves. These brakes recommend that you do not do any harsh acceleration or harsh braking to brake them in, unlike some other pads which will recommend harsh braking. Okay, hopefully I'm less covered. No, still pretty messy. That'll be it, except for the testing. So I'll show you testing now, just small little tests, no driving super quick. I'm gonna have to let Lex know she cannot drive this car as she normally does, just for a little while until the brakes are settled in. So that's this side done. I'm gonna just test it, and then we'll move on to figure out what's wrong with the front. So after some GoPro issues, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play a little bit of car roulette to move my cars out, and then we'll join me in the test drive. Feels so weird being in this car compared to that one for once. Not my choice of steering wheel to drive with, but gotta test these brakes regardless. So let's get her started and see how she goes. So from tests so far, the car is driving quite nicely. There's no dragging of the brakes, and I can brake. I'm not braking harshly, as that's what the instructions for this brake specifically say to do, but just slow amounts of braking. And already the braking feels not only straighter, because there was an uneven wear on the pads, but it's feeling really good again. Rear brake pads on an MR2SW20. Right, now on to diagnosing the fronts So after checking, the fronts look fine at the moment. The squeaking was actually coming from the rear, not the front, and that's where the pad had worn down. So not today's video, but at least you now know how. One more visual inspection after test drive, and then just driving carefully for the next couple of days to make sure everything's all sound. And then I'll have to adjust the handbrake underneath, but that's already been in the video. So you can go watch that one if you need to know how to adjust the handbrake just to match doing the rear brake job.